In the previous chapter, we used multiple skills to create tables efficiently. Today's tutorial will focus on PivotTable. What is a pivot table? Several advantages stand out: data arrangement and filtering, subtotal function, and flexible data analysis. Simple clicks on a pivot table may drastically alter its layouts and categories. Let's start with a simple example to get into PivotTable. This is a simple sales table. Place your cursor in any cell in the data table and then click Pivot Table in the Insert tab to sum up sales by city and product name. The pop-up dialog selects the data area for you, and you can choose whether the pivot table should be placed on a new or existing worksheet. Now we have a blank worksheet, which can be customized in the right pane. It is composed of Field List and Pivot Table areas. Field List shows the table headers, and Pivot Table Areas contains 4 parts: filters, calls, rows, and values. You can receive different analysis results by dragging different fields into the following Pivot Table areas. To put it bluntly, if you know how to place fields in the proper regions, you will learn how Pivot Table works. If we drag sales into values, the Pivot Table will tell you the sum of sales immediately. If you drag year into rows, the sales for 2020 and 2021 will be displayed. Drag product into rows, and we will get the sales of all products in 2020 and 2021. Let's drag storage into calls to fill in the details, and the left pivot table will elaborate on the sales performance. In brief, I'll summarize the effect that these 4 areas can achieve. The calls and rows areas are similar to rows and columns in normal tables. To make them display in columns, drag them into calls. To make fields appear in rows, you can drag them into rows. To put it another way, the position of fields can determine the pivot table's structure. If multiple fields are added in rows or calls, you need to pay attention to their order. For example, if year is in front of product, the pivot table will take year as a level 1 director, followed by the sales of these 4 products. If we put product in front of years, product will become a level 1 director and followed by sales in 2020 and 2021. There is another rule for row and column. A field can only be found in rows or calls. You cannot see it appear in both rows and calls. Okay, let's move to the values part. Values is often used for summing numerical values. Unlike rows and calls, you can drag the same field here multiple times. A typical case would be dragging sales into values twice, and the table will show 2 groups of the same sales. Click the drop-down button of any sales. Click the drop-down button and choose Value Field Settings. In the pop-up dialog, you can customize the name and select the type of calculation, such as sum, average, max, and min. Click Show Values As and select % of grand total to show sales as a percentage. It's hard to sense changes when analyzing statistics. Percentage conversion can help us detect data discrepancies. Right-click any percentage value and select Descending at Sort to arrange the percentage from largest to smallest. By doing so, we will learn which one sells good and which one sells poorly. Finally, we will learn about filters, which can help us filter data. Complex data will make the table unrecognizable. We can drag keywords into filters to sort data. Suppose we want to filter storage. Drag storage into filters to create a filter in the left pivot table. If you select 64G, the pivot table will collect data for the 64G products. You may drag the product into filter and drag storage to rows. Select iPhone 12 in the filter. The pivot table will only display the sales for iPhone 12. If we want to quickly produce many spreadsheets, each of which only displays information from one product, we may select Show Report Filter Pages from the Options drop-down menu. Pick the product in the pop-up box and click OK. In this way, several worksheets named after product will be generated below. You can adopt this efficient strategy when sorting data for dozens, if not hundreds of products. The above is a simple introduction to PivotTable. Different field lists can realize different presentations. Okay, let's continue to explore PivotTable. In order to compare data, click the View tab and select New Window. Select Vertical Text Box in the Arrange All drop-down list to view the pivot table and the source data simultaneously. The source data changes variously in workplaces. If we change the content of the original table, PivotTable will not update the changes in the original sales table. Recreating a pivot table is common, yet unnecessary. We can fix the problem with two buttons. Suppose the source data is changing. Select the pivot table and click Refresh All in the upper ribbon area, and you can use the shortcut Ctrl-Alt-F5. If we add a new city to the data source and change the pivot table, Refresh All won't work. We need to click Change Data Source and reselect the data area. Finally, click OK to update the data in the pivot table. You can create a dynamic pivot table by expanding cells automatically to avoid inconvenience. Select any cell in the source data table on the left. Click Table in the Insert tab. The system will select the data area by default, and then you can click OK. When we add the new data, the table will extend cells automatically. To refresh the data quickly, you can click the pivot table on the right and hit the shortcut keys Ctrl-Alt-F5. Okay, I'll list several common problems with a pivot table case. This sheet details the sales for the years 2020 and 2021. Drag order date into rows and sales into values, and the pivot table will generate several lines of data, which is too much for us to handle. Newbies may become frustrated, yet the problem is simple to solve. Right-click any date in the pivot table and select Group. Then you can customize the date period. WPS Spreadsheet will recognize the start date and end date. You can keep the default. Then select the unit in the setting box below. We select Months and click OK. By doing so, the data will present by month. Note, the data obtained from the pivot table is the sum of 2 years. When you double-click the statistics for January, a new sheet will generate the details, where you can find all sales data in 2020 and 2021. How can we separate them? Right-click a date again and click Group. In fact, multiple units can be selected. When the source data contains information from several years, we may choose years and months at the same time and click OK to separate the data. To exit grouping, you can right-click a date and click Ungroup. Now, we can compute the matching bonus commission based on the overall sales. You can multiply the sales by 0.1%. This also illustrates what a pivot table can do. Next, I'll tell you the second learning point, how to insert calculated fields in a pivot table. Some students may simply believe that multiplying the blank cell by 0.1% would give them the right answer. Try it, and we will find that only the first result is valid. The rest of the results are clearly incorrect. What can we do? First, click the Options tab, then click the Fields Items drop-down button and select Calculated Fields to pop up Insert Calculated Field. Second, enter Sales Commission at Name and select Sales at Fields. The sales commission is 0.1% of total sales. So enter asterisk 0.1 in the formula bar and click OK to get the corresponding sales commission. In practical work, we often analyze and display data of multiple dimensions. We will move to the third part, how to do a multi-dimensional analysis of sales proportion. Recreate a new pivot table and drag product and storage into rows and year into calls. Finally, drag sales volume and sales into values. Right-click any sales to select Show Value As and % of parent row total. By doing so, we may compare the sales proportions of each product in 2020 and 2021. The report shows that the sales volume of iPhone 11 is 54.77% in 2020 and 42.23% in 2021, showing a downward trend year on year. We can press Ctrl-A to select the whole pivot table and press Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V to copy and paste the pivot table. Select the second pivot table, right-click the sales volume, and select Show Value As and percent of parent column total. Then we can get the sales details for each product within the same year. Observe the pivot table report, and you will find the sales for iPhone 11 accounted for 27.11% in 2020 and 29.16% in 2021. As a result, we get the analytical conclusion: the iPhone 11's overall sales volume is rather high. Despite a drop in overall sales in 2021, its sales proportion climbed modestly compared to other products this year. Two pivot tables are more suitable for multidimensional data analysis. This lesson explained the primary usage of pivot table. Let's go through what we've learned so far. 4 pivot table areas are crucial. Rows and calls areas primarily influence the table's structure. Values is for analysis, and filters is for filtering. Different reports can be generated by combining different fields. You can group the dates in a pivot table. You can also insert calculated fields into a pivot table. It's easier to analyze if the numerical value is converted to a percentage. The next lesson will explore pivot table further. Stay tuned.